create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their subconscious.
How could I ever acquire enough detail to make them think that it's reality?
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
So how did we end up here?
Well, we just came from the,
Think about it, Ariadne. How did you get here? Where are you right now?
We're dreaming?
You're actually in the middle of the workshop right now, sleeping. This is your first lesson in shared dreaming. Stay calm.
This is our reality. Russian dolls. They just went through the entire periodic table from the first element to the last, and they form shells upon shells. Russian doll. Resonant frequencies building on one another.
How'd it go?
Not good. Dream within a dream, huh? I'm impressed. But in my dream, you play by my rules.
Ah, yes, but you see, Mr. Sato,
We're not in your dream.
we're in mine. How you mess up the carpet?
It wasn't my fault.
You're the architect.
Hello, Neo.
Who are you?
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you. You have many questions, and though the process has altered your consciousness, you remain irrevocably human. Ergo, some of my answers you will understand, and some of them you will not. Concordantly, while your first question may be the most pertinent, you may or may not realize it is also the most irrelevant.
Why am I here?
Your life is the sum of a remainder of an unbalanced equation inherent to the programming of the Matrix. You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision.
This is the domain of sin. Do you notice how we have these nested realities of truth? Pearls are pure. That's why they form the gates of heaven. It is the pure consuming the impure. And that's why Jesus said not to throw your pearls before swine. What he meant was, don't throw the clean before the unclean. Don't mix the two. So the child in the shell here, let me close this up, is actually a metaphor for Jesus. He's the pearl in the shell. You see how he's wrapped in these layers of linen? And he was wrapped in layers of linen at his crucifixion. The pearl in the shell. Now obviously this is a modified image. There's all kinds of dark imagery associated with this. But we're going to get into that, okay? I don't want you to think, oh, okay, so you're showing us something that you're trying to say something dark and evil is good. No, I'm just telling you what they were trying to depict here, all right? Now, let's get back into this mosque, because it has some very profound relics within it that are just fascinating. There's what's called the Emperor's Door. And It is said to have been made from pieces of Noah's Ark. The church is actually filled with these supernatural relics. There's something also that's called the wishing column. Here it is here. And it is said to sweat or cry when you touch it. They've got it covered in like copper or bronze. But there's something like supernatural about it. Now, there's a dark history of this church, because during the siege of Constantinople, there were people trapped inside. Women and children hid inside the mosque, but they became trapped, and they became the spoils of war, divided amongst the triumphant invaders. It even says here that there were teenage males and young boys that were chained up and sold off into slavery. And now we understand the secret of this little boy here, trapped in the mosque, spoil of war in Aipetgoat2. There was actually a sultan named Suleiman, spelt just like Soleimani. You know, the guy that Trump had bombed. And he put these candlesticks outside of the doors of the mosque. Let's look at that. Here it is here in the 16th century. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent brought 2 colossal candlesticks from his conquest of Hungary and placed them on either side of the mihrab. This is the opening here of the mosque, and you can see this looks very similar. It's actually the interior. And these are the 2 candlesticks that he bought. Now, is there any relation to Soleimani and Suleiman? I don't know, but they have the same name. It's actually spelt the same in the alternative spelling. See, in the Americanized version, we pronounce it this way, but in the rest of this article, you'll see it actually spelt differently. Let me show you. See? Spelt differently all throughout the article, 18 times, except for, actually just a few times, these are just the footnotes, but except for in the title of this Wikipedia article. Now, back to the mosque, because there's more connections. Now, Trump took out Suleiman, and in Aipetgoat we see they took out the Hagia Sophia, which could have also been a metaphor for the Soleimani Mosque, which is another major mosque literally yards away from this one on the Golden Horn of Turkey. So there was some kind of manifestation of what happened in Aipetgoat2 in real life when Trump took out Soleimani.
Tens of thousands joined funeral processions, giving Iran's most powerful military leader a hero's send-off. Chanting "Death to America," the crowds of Shia Muslims took to the streets in Iraq, vowing revenge. The commander of Iran's overseas operations, Qasem Soleimani, was assassinated in a US drone strike. CCTV footage has emerged of the moment that rockets hit 2 cars driving out of Baghdad's airport. Of course, there's fury in Iran too, with anti-Western demonstrations growing before Qasem Soleimani's body is flown home for burial. Iranian officials say the killing of the general is a declaration of war. At a rally in Miami, US President Donald Trump said he ordered the killing to stop a war.
He was planning a very major attack, and we got him.
American soldiers are pouring into the Middle East, with an extra 3,000 troops being deployed. President Trump said he wanted to get out of this region's seemingly endless wars. But in deed and words, he's doing precisely the opposite, even threatening to attack Iran's culturally significant sites. The immediate consequence of all this is that more US troops will be needed to brace for Iran's inevitable response. Adam Harvey, ABC News, Beirut.
They talk about a golden crescent was mounted on the top of the dome, just like in iPetGo2. Let me show you that. When it imploded, you'll see the golden crescent. And it implodes down into, you can see it there. It's not golden, but I think you get the metaphor. Now, Trump has been compared to Justinian, the guy who built this mosque. What do you mean, Casey? That's probably a stretch. No, it's not. Let's look at Justinian. Here he is here. He was known as the emperor who never sleeps. And guess what? Trump was also known as the person who never sleeps.
I'm working long hours, right up till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning.
What time do you get up?
5 o'clock.
Some quick math shows that's just 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night for President Trump. That's well short of the 7 to 9 hours doctors usually recommend.
Gwenda Blair, Trump's biographer, even said in a 2017 interview with The Guardian that Trump has made a big deal of saying he never sleeps, and that people who sleep are lazy. But there's more. So we showed you the Trump connection to the mosque, that they asked that it not be converted into a mosque from a museum. That happened on the summer solstice. Now we're showing you how he compares in not ever sleeping. And both ruled over riots. Yep. Justinian was actually involved in quelling riots. And guess what they were called? The Nika riots. Or you could call it Nika riots. And he actually dispatched soldiers to take out these rioters who were citizens. And he killed 30,000 to quell the Nika riots. But there's more. There was a huge depopulation of Italy under Justinian. So there was all these synchronicities. Let's look this up here so you guys can see this. Look at this creepy picture of Justinian. So, Justinian ruled over the very first Black Plague in human history. In fact, they named this Black Plague the Justinian Plague. You can't make this up. Here it is right here. The Plague of Justinian was the beginning of the first plague spamdemic. The first old world spamdemic of plague. You can't make any of this up.
But somewhere in that vast dominion, with enough ammunition to wipe out not just the capital city, what that would mean in life. 100 million were struck down by the plague.
After this plague, they were hit by an earthquake and a tsunami. And this is one of the creepiest rulers I think I've ever seen, because something else happened during his rule. The sun shone. There were noxious, but it was providing daylight, but it refused to give much heat. There were nauseous fumes in the air. This was during the 530s, and it seemed to many that God had abandoned the Christian Roman Empire. This caused a famine unlike any of those of the time that had seen before. Winter is coming, just like in Game of Thrones. The sun shone, but it refused to give much heat.
I know this is hard for you, but winter is coming. We know what's coming with it. We can't face it alone.
And who can say how many years this winter will last?
With a growing concern over the notion that chemical and biological weapons were unaccounted for and could potentially fall into the hands of terrorists, the Department of Defense wanted to test the nation's readiness for such an emergency. In June 2001, the DoD conducted a war game called Operation Dark Winter.
Dark Winter was a major exercise that was done prior to 9/11, earlier in 2001, to look at the effects of a biological terror event. And it was kind of a scary scenario. We would lose a lot of people if a really effective bioterror event occurred.
The simulation evaluated the government's ability to respond and communicate with the public, and the exercise even included mock news reports.
Since the diagnosis of 20 smallpox cases in Oklahoma City 12 days ago, hundreds have now died, thousands have become infected.
We had to, think about things like, quarantines and martial law, and things like that. All of a sudden, our system wasn't our system anymore because we had this terrible thing going on, and we had to change. We had to, change the way we thought about things. We had to change the way the military interrelated with the civilian world, and it was really an eye-opener.
And the conclusion were tens of millions of deaths, no commerce between states, no airplanes flying for 6 months, and war between Oklahoma and Texas.
Today, the world is confronting a public health emergency unlike any we've seen in over a century. We are facing a highly transmissible and deadly virus which not only claims lives but also disrupts the very foundations of our society. The American healthcare system is being taxed to the limit. Our economy is spiraling downward, and our population is being paralyzed by fear stemming from a lack of a coordinated response and a dearth of accurate, clear communication about the path forward. Our window of opportunity is closing. If we fail to improve our response now, based on science, I fear the pandemic will get worse and be prolonged. There will be likely a resurgence of COVID-19 this fall. It'll be greatly compounded by the challenges of seasonal influenza. Without better planning, 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history. 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history.
Solar minimum? Who knows? So then this was followed by a tsunami. In 551, the eastern Mediterranean was rocked by the 551 Beirut earthquake, which triggered a tsunami. Combined fatalities of events exceeded 30,000, with tremors felt from Antioch to Alexandria. Now, Justinian, his goal was to bring back the Roman Empire, but all of his desires to do that were stopped by what he was faced with this plague and the earthquakes and tsunamis. Now, Donald Trump has been compared to Justinian himself sealing the deal that iPetGo2 predicted his presidency way back in 2012. CNBC, dated May 4th, 2016, the beginning of, well, this was before he got elected. And they're saying, now forget about the message, just think about how they're comparing him to Justinian, okay, as I read through this article. Justinian I, a Byzantine emperor, known as emperor who never sleeps, made it his goal to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. He spent much of his time and resources to achieve that end. He was successful at recapturing the enemy's lost territories, but never fully regained its glory, its lost glory. Some historians have suggested that Justinian's land grab actually hastened the final decline of what was once the Western Roman Empire, which after his death was reconquered by the very people Justinian drove out. This took place in the 6th century, but it seems to be playing out all over again, more than 1,000 years later, with Donald Trump. Now that Trump is the likely nominee, he needs to change his message to unify the party and the nation. Trump's vision for the nation is backward-looking. See how they couch this? They knew. They know exactly what they're going to do. Trump should learn from the mistakes of Justinian and others who have gone before him. They are comparing him to Justinian, the Roman ruler, who made the mosque that we found in iPetGo2, long before he was even thinking about running for president, and nobody knew he was going to win. Now, there are more synchronicities, because this plague of Justinian, they're saying, originated from China. It says here, ancient and modern Yersinia pestis strains closely related to the ancestor of the Justinian plague strain have been found in Tian Shan, a system of mountain ranges on the borders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and China, suggesting that the Justinian plague originated in or near that region. It says here, the most basal or root level existing strains as a whole are found in Qinghai, China. What does Trump call the CV? He calls it the Chinese plague. But it goes deeper. There are more synchronicities between Justinian and Trump, because Justinian appears as a character in a 1939 time travel novel. Yes, Justinian was a time traveler. The novel is called Lest Darkness Fall. Now, I can't find a free copy of this anywhere, otherwise I would have read it to you, the part that talks about Justinian. And we could have looked at it to see if there were any comparisons to Biff and Trump. But there is something really weird going on with the Justinian character and Donald Trump. Way back in 2016, they were comparing him to him before he even won the presidency. What you're going to see in this image here, in the background, is what appears to be, and what we originally thought was an explosion. And we look at this, and we looked at this, and we realized that this is a map. What you're looking at here is actually a map. This dark area down here is the Caspian Sea. This area where the shell is the Caucasus Mountains. And there's a particular seashell. You see her holding this bottle of heliotrope purple. And apparently, this comes from the Hexaplex trunculus shell. They derive this blue-purple dye. It is very sought after, and these shells exist almost exclusively in the Caucasus Mountains, which basically divide the Caspian Sea from the Black Sea. Here's the proof. The hexaplex trunculus, it says right here. Some of the dyeing certainly occurred at home, but complicated dyes such as purple were undertaken by professional dyers. 4 classical textile remains preserve traces of purple dye, the fragments of Calvia. And it goes on down here to talk about how the people from the Caucasus Mountains used the decorative fabrics with elaborate figures with a paint or dye created by mashing the leaves of a certain plant and mixing them with water. And they also talk about the shells being used as well. Now, it took 12,000 of these shells to make 1.4 grams of this purple dye. So if we're looking at this as a map, as I just spoke to you a few minutes ago, and we're trying to figure out that this is the Caspian Sea, this is the Caucasus Mountains, what's this in the background? Well, this is the Astana Concert Hall. And this is where things go off the rails, where we wrap this all up. You see these large, protruding, but somewhat, concentric looking protrusions coming out of the ground. Okay, so I dug, and we actually found this back in 2013. This is most likely the Astana Concert Hall. So this is the Astana Concert Hall, okay? And as you can see, it is very visually similar. And so if we were to look at this as a map and compare this image here, we begin to see that this emerges. And it looks very visually similar to the concert hall. So now let's look at the map. Now that you have your orientation, the Caucasus Mountains, which are here. Let's blow this up. Here the Caucasus Mountain divides the Black Sea from the Caspian Sea. This is where all these purple shells are that were used in antiquity. And then here is Astana right here. So now you see that the woman is sitting in the shell here. You saw the black portion, which is the Caspian Sea, between her and the Astana Concert Hall. It's a progression. Now, when we look at the eclipse that occurred on June 21st, this will help tie it all in together. Remember the Boston Marathon? Well, the mother and the family were from this region right here.